and many more. And my guests this evening are, I have the Chairperson, Media Council of Uganda, Mr. Paul Ekochu. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. I have Managing Director, The Observer, Executive Member, Uganda Editors Guild, Pius Katunzi. And I have Board Chairperson, Uganda Media Women's Association, and Assistant Commissioner, Communication and Information Management, Dr. Patricia Letho. Gentlemen and Dr. Patricia, thank you so much for joining us. A warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
It's not many times when I sit and more or less talking about us. Now, I've always been talking about them. Now the spotlight is on ourselves. Media, press freedom in Uganda. And let me begin from my extreme left, Pius Katunzi. Where you would say Uganda is in such a unique position, because perhaps we have the biggest number of radio stations on the continent, if not in the world. Perhaps we have even the biggest number of TV stations in one city, in Kampala. This is a place also where almost everybody can say or write anything they can, and even expect to walk down the streets without bothering to look behind their shoulders or even sleep tight. But is that the freedom we can talk about?
Thank you, Mr. Kamara. I will start by disagreeing with you. I think we are kind of exhibitionists. We like big things, so we have come to, I've heard this narrative before, that you're talking about that there's no freedom in Uganda, but we have 120 radios, we have this, but you see, it's not about numbers. What is the quality that is coming out of that? As I speak now, the quality of debate has really gone down. So some people actually, they are on those radios, there's nothing of substance they are discussing. Either they are discussing, some of them are, some radios I would call propagandist channels. So there's no news. They don't speak to the authority. We seek the truth, and we want to speak the truth to the authority. We want the authorities to change. And even that landscape has also changed. Because when you look at exactly when the forefathers came about with this World Press Freedom Day, it was in the 1948, then to 1990s. Then the kind of the conflict seemed to be between the journalists and the state, but now that has become wider. So we have the corporate world and also have the state. So actually now the biggest threat to media freedom is not the state, but there are some subtle threats. For instance,
the powers that pay.
Yes.
But before you go to the powers that pay, yes. You said others are propagandists, others are what? But look, even if we look at the greater democracies like the United States, if you watch Fox News, for example, there will be maybe die-hard extremist Republican, and if you look at MSNBC, there will be more or less like the Biden apologists. I mean, isn't that how things seem to be, even to the people we look up to?
Yes, Kamara, you may say that, but then look at the quality of the population. Are they in position to discern and distinguish what is right and what is wrong? Are they in a position to sieve certain information? You see, in the US, Fox News can come up and it is a propagandist tool for this group or something like that, or it can come with fake news. But people are able to discern that. But right now, we are being kind of hijacked by the social media.
I think, Pius, you are underestimating Ugandans.
No, I'm not underestimating Uganda. Actually, that's what is in the market. Because if the market was that serious, then I don't think we would have had all the proliferation of all those media outlets.
It looks like actually the spotlight is on you, Paul, because when he's talking about us and maybe that we're wobbly or propagandists, we don't know what we're doing, and the debate is low, the quality and stuff like that. So you, Mr. Chairperson, what happened to us?
Thank you, Kamara. It's a very interesting exposition by Pius. But I want to agree with him on some parts and disagree. But I want to start in this manner. We should first, when we are talking about media freedom and press freedom, we should contextualize it. We should understand where we are, where we were, where we are going. We do not just speak out and cherry pick and say this because of A, B, C, D. Now, if you think of it that way, then you must also think in the sense of the glass of water. Is it a glass half full or a glass half empty? Now, in my view, it's a glass half full, or 3/4 full for that matter. And you and Pius and others who have studied journalism understand where journalism started from in Uganda and where we have reached. And therefore, to say a proliferation of radio stations is not an indicator of press freedom, I think is not very accurate. Press freedom is a measurement. So you must start from somewhere. There was a zero. And we are now measuring at a point where Pius, very graciously, and I agree with him, says the biggest threat to media freedoms is not the state. The state has put all enabling things before everybody, the infrastructure, the training levels, maybe not so good, but they're all there. But the threat has come from somewhere else now. He's saying the non-state players. We shall discuss that later. But as far as we are concerned in the Media Council, we think that, as the law says, the council is set up to enable the freedom of the press. And we try as much as possible to make sure it is free. And in my measure today, if I say there are 320 radio stations, 70 publications print, over 100 online, TV stations 45, all of them talking on a daily basis about every single subject on earth, and freely so, including talking to the truth to power, including Pius's observer here. They talk the truth to power, and he can sit here and expose his views on issues on press freedom freely. So I think we should be in context understanding that press freedom in Uganda has grown tremendously, and indeed we have it. How much it is, we can discuss, but it is there and existent.
Dr. Patricia Litho, you know, you talked about the quality of debate. And is it really on the side of the journalists themselves for the quality to go low? And I want to put the context. In the 60s and 70s, I'm told, if there was a public lecture at Makerere University, that some students could even skip a meal to go and attend a public lecture of Professor Ali Mazrui, Professor Mahmoud Mamdan, to listen, book a seat, so that you can be there and not miss it. If there is another, public lecture that's going to happen in Makerere University, probably you'll need to go hall by hall and try to entice people to come. This is where we are. So with that kind of mentality, where we're not hungry to get more knowledge, what do you expect is going to happen across the spectrum?
Well, in the context you've described it, and I recall being a political science student as one of those subjects, and the scenario you describe is actually true what used to happen, but there's a general saturation of information. Thanks to information technology, the convergence of technology, the access to technology, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's improvement in quality. And because there are so many ways we can access information, sometimes we've got to look at the inconveniences of getting myself to Makerere. For instance, just a while ago we were talking about who will be in Makerere tomorrow for the World Press Freedom Day. You think about the traffic and things like that, and the first question is there going to be an online access? That is one of the reasons. But coming with that, there's a lot more exposure, and people's priority in life, should I say, has changed. But also I think people are more guarded about what they say, what they shouldn't say, who they associate with. And even the lecturers at Makerere, as an academic who has taught there as well, I think there's been also an infringement on academic freedom. How much can you actually say and feel safe? How much can't you say and think it's okay? But also the yearning for knowledge has a lot to do with information overload out there. Before there was only these limited places, and if they told you Professor Mujaj is going to speak, hey, who wouldn't want to speak like that? People had depth, people seem to know what they're about, but these days I think we're all over the place, we don't specialize, and there's that regurgitation. So I think, like Paya said earlier, there's need for media information literacy, if I could just bring it closer to home, in that while there's a lot of information there are so many media outlets, what is the quality?
Dr. Lito, who is responsible for the quality that is low now, and yet we seem to have had better quality back in the day? And I'm asking this because even if you look at people who are writing in the literary world, I don't think, with all respect, we still have people who can write. I mean, in the days of Okoti Biteke, of David Odobadiri, or of people like those who could write, Paul Bukenya. Now, maybe we're writing very many books, but somehow they're not having an impact. And I don't know whether I'm missing the point, but that's what I see.
No, you're not
because
missing the
when I look
point.
back, the books have been read of African writers and Ugandan writers, are the books written in the 70s, in the 80s,
Yes.
and you reach here, they're not. For example, you have a doctorate. These guys are highly educated. You have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, and guys, there are no books. They'll ask you, oh, coach, where's your book? Pius, where's your book? If you do not write, no wonder it's a literary desert, because you guys have not put pen to paper. And if you guys can't write, who will? And if people are not reading your literary works, how do we improve ourselves?
No, I don't know who this is to, but I want to answer to that. That I think there's a general compromise in quality by some of the systems we've put in place that should have been available to support, but they haven't. For instance, if you look at the traditional, maybe what used to be the Ivy Leagues of Uganda, those schools, that quality is not there anymore. For instance, I went to Namagunga, but the Namagunga today is not the Namagunga I went to. So sometimes we have these...
We still want our girls to go to Namagunga, though.
Yes, please do. But personally, I've taken my children to the more recent schools. Also because, first of all, there's been a lot of changes in what matters now. But also there's been a lot of compromise in the basic primary foundation way of training. Thanks to UPE, it should have been an amazing thing, but then we lost quality.
Okay, let me take it back to Pius. Okay, Paul, because the issue of quality is key. Even if we have a saturated media landscape, if there's no quality, gentlemen, then we have a problem. So who's responsible for this?
This is one of the biggest debates we're having today because of how the media is transforming itself. We have realized for the journalism to get better or to get good journalism out of all the outlets, you need quality and need training, and training to subdue the bad voices. However, we have to understand again, I always talk about context that we are dealing with in today. There was a study, one of these Ivy League universities, about the attention span of the youth today. And they'll say when you are lecturing in a lecture room, 7 minutes attention span. If you don't deliver your message in 7 minutes, you're going to lose their attention and they'll go on something else. So if you're going to write a 1,000-page book, who's going to read it? So the quality of books now has to be read in a different manner. You must look at the quality of how somebody can compact a message into 10 pages from 1,000, and you say, this guy is good. Not in the way he's got such good lexicon, such good language. He speaks poetically and speaks what? That's no longer the measure of a good book. That's the measure for a good book for us who read Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart. But we must accept that we are now becoming dinosaurs. And the ones who are coming in think differently from us. So they want short, quick, direct stories which make them understand. The Elon Musk generation, I call it. The X generation, that's why X makes it. Short messages, understand quality. So if you want to judge how people write today, judge the short text and see how much information can you get out of a short text and make it sound good.
Pius, there was a time when you go into a media house and you find some of these senior editors and they do the impact on your life, on your professional life. I had mine. People like Samuel Guma, the late again Kevin Aliro, even people like Rachel Mugarura. You know, somebody touches your script and turns it around. And the next morning, I'm like, no, this time around, I am going to write a script. I don't want Rachel or Betty Dindi to touch it. I would write it, again she would touch it. And she would show me that I'm actually still very young in the game. And I would accept, humble myself. But are we grooming the guys who have been able to be managing editors, people you have reached higher places of power in our media, in our newsrooms? Are we grooming? Do we have those people we can look up to? You know, because when you're growing up, you had Charles Onyango Bo, you have David Oma Balikoa, you have Samuel Guma, you have Andrew Mwenda. You know, you can look up the guy and say, okay, he's good. And you want to walk in their footsteps. May I think now, for us who are like seniors because of age and we've been there, probably we have lost that touch of holding the baton to the guys who are coming after us.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kamara. You see, the point you've talked about grooming is one of the things actually we do at the Observer. Unfortunately, we have groomed and trained many people, but the corporate world has taken away that group. That's why now you see there's a big gap. And what's the problem? It's because the corporate world is giving more. Kamara, I would like to give you an example, my personal example. When I left, I started working for the Monitor when I was still at the university. It was not giving us a lot of money, but one of the things that drove me was I wanted my byline to be seen. Okay, I wanted that, and I wanted actually to compete with Obo. I wanted us to be given an assignment, and I said that, oh, I can beat this guy at writing, or I can be better than him, or he can be at the same. Because
that's the mentality.
Yeah, these days, I was shocked one day. We had an editorial meeting, and then there was this promising girl who had come to do internship at our place. So after the editorial meeting, I said, can you please write me a short story about what has happened? The girl started crying. I said, why are you crying? She was crying, and this is not restricted to only girls, but even boys. So you give them an assignment, they don't see the value. You was talking about the analytical pieces and that kind of thing. That one also is going out because the information needs. We seem to have a conflict. You see, the old people love details. The young people, I just don't know what they're interested in. I think they're interested in movies, short movie reviews, that kind of thing. And it seems everything's available for them. So their curiosity has become so narrow. So they no longer want to. You ask somebody, you assign somebody to go and research about HIV/AIDS, and you say, please go and read something about Philemon Lutaya. I say, who is Philemon Lutaya? He's not interested in knowing. I can't understand that context.
Gentlemen and Dr. Litho, we are going to take a break, and on the spot, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Kamara. My guest this evening are Paul Ekochu, Chairperson, Media Council of Uganda, Pius Katunzi, Managing Director, The Observer, and Dr. Patricia Litho, Board Chairperson, Uganda Media Women's Association. And we're discussing press freedom in Uganda. Earlier, also, Katunzi, you talked about the power of the advertising, revenue. Because if you attack the corporate or expose the corporate body, and yet they are giving you money, and you are a commercial television station like us here, isn't it very difficult to navigate the need for revenue and telling the story for those who are afflicted in the country? How can, you are the higher level of media management, how do you deal with this?
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. I don't think there's a straight answer for this, but it's a big problem because, as I was earlier indicating, that now there are subtle threats, and the corporate character that has changed towards the media organization is also somehow being, should I say, incited by some other powers. So if I happen to wrong, in quotes, certain powers, those powers would talk to this corporate and say, hey, why are you supporting these people when they're doing this to us? You know? So one of the ways we have tried to mitigate this is right now we are moving away from traditional advertising and going to talk to them and say, hey, this is how I can make you shine, and this is how you can make my pocket swell a bit. So sometimes it's no longer as obvious as it used to be that, oh, you're going to see maybe they're advertising a new project and that kind of thing. So we just go and say, no, I think we can turn around this project. Let me give an example. One time, northern Uganda, NOSAF, had, I think, like a 3-year program, and they gave out money to buy goats, to buy that kind of thing. So they used to publicize the lists of people, beneficiaries. So, but those lists were not making any sense. So when went to them, I said, well, other than just putting out lists, why don't you give us those lists and take us the people, we do the story, and then the people will enjoy reading the story. And in fact, that thing had a better impact. But you see, in their old format, for them that was the old way was way of accounting. They could not think that even stories could be used to account. So in a way, we have become innovative and trying to see that, you know, hey, you need me, I also need you. But also, we have to look somewhere else.
Okay, so, but Paul, for example, writers have now since become also media owners. Right from the days of the Monitor publication, where you have Fula Ogutu and his group, these are sharp journalists who later started the media house. They knew they could write a story and ask questions, but now they're thinking about bills, paying salaries. Before you know it, when Andrew Mwenda was a sharp journalist, and and then he starts the Independent. Now he's thinking about bills, paying salaries and taxes, and so is the late Kevin Aliro. Isn't it sort of a catch-22 and maybe a conflict of interest for you as a journalist now to also become a media owner and maintain your integrity and your objectivity?
I don't know that the conflict is interest, but I think the focus should be on how the media house handles its professionalism and ethics, regardless of who the owner is. If the owner is a journalist, in my view, it's an advantage because he knows the entire trail of how journalism works. However, if he starts putting his views as a journalist when he's the media owner and the manager into how stories should be run, he loses his touch of professionalism. Yeah,
but because the people is telling you do ABCD, that army of journalists at the end of the month, they need some pay. Yes. And the person they're hounding is the power that pays.
The power that pays is not the manager, or is it?
No, it's outside. I'm talking about, outside. I'm a reporter in the newsroom and you are the media owner. And the person I'm writing about, or the institution I'm writing about, is the institution that gives me 70% of the advertising revenue that runs my media house.
Recently, I had a discussion with one of the media owners or media managers in Uganda here, and they informed me that their print paper has increased in circulation over the last quarter, in spite of them doing the right thing. As people would say, if you do the right thing and write the right stories, you will lose readership and you will lose revenue. So in my view, if you do the right thing, if you're professional and consistent, the commercial arms, the commercial stakeholders, government, all will trust you. Because everybody wants somebody who's honest and trustworthy, and you will make a good business. If you try to bend the rules because you are trying to get money, if you go to someone and you lower the price of your goods, which are very qualitative, just because you want to get the buck, eventually you will lose value of your business as well. So that's the same thing with what you're doing in the journalist, in your media houses. In my view, if you maintain professionalism, maintain ethics, be consistent, tell the truth, when you're wrong, say you're wrong, guys trust you. and guys will put money where you are.
Dr. Patricia, you will know that in rural Uganda or even here in Kampala, quite a number of our colleagues, or even ourselves, are not paid that kind of money where you think you can have something to eat off it, something to save, and something to invest. In other words, you can blow up that money in one day, and your bank declares it bankrupt one day after pay.
Yes.
And sometimes when reporters, let's say in Fort Portal, in Arua, in Karamoja, they are going to the field, and all these, media houses are owned by politicians. It is the politician who will come and pick you from the media house, take you somewhere in the field, probably even give you some lunch, and then bring you back. Is that a healthy relationship?
No, it's not a healthy relationship. And of course, having been a foot soldier and then crossed to maybe a PR person for government, I should understand that. But it's like the question of the good journalist come media house owner. So now me, Patricia, the head of communication at the Ministry of Energy, I will almost forget or drop those ethics. And having been a journalist, and there are always those issues of being transported and then what happens thereafter. And of course, being female, sometimes there are other dynamics. But what happens is, I understand how the other side works. I know that there's no guarantee that my story will run. So I've got to do something about it. So I will...
Wait a minute. What is this about it?
I'm telling you what I have to do. I'll know that the media house it's not the brown envelope. I know why they're laughing. But you see, the thing is this. I have an event in Moyo.
You have been paying journalists to run your stories?
No. I've been transporting them. That is what I'm doing about it. Because the media house cannot afford to transport this very good journalist to cover the president in such and such a place. The president has his press team, yes, but they might not take care of my other interests. I'm talking the PR hat. Okay. I might want a photo of the permanent secretary in this angle. Everyone is just focusing on the president, yes? I might want a side interview to show what else the ministry has done. Everyone is focusing on the president and what he has said. So it does me good to transport some journalists from Kampala or get some up country and have them on my team, make them understand my business, that, like you said, the media owner might not necessarily be interested in. Okay. Yes, so they would send someone to UBL and not necessarily the president in Mbarara. Okay. So I will transport
let me say
the
this.
journalists.
Let me tell you, Uganda, did you know that news is free?
Yes, it is free.
It's free.
But transport is not free. You shouldn't be paying
for it. But let me say this.
Transport
Pius, let me come to you. There's this animal called the transport refund that has been abused. What is this transport refund? And I'm going to say this, I would be reluctant when I was a foot soldier to line up at Hotel Africana. I'm going to sign for this thing called transport refund. Even though I am broke. But I also know guys will go to the field, there's no lunch, sometimes there's no breakfast, and then there's going to be transport refund. You are a media, you are an editor. Are you encouraging for your reporter to get this transport refund? Of how much sometimes? Okay. And on what is the consequence to the judgment of the reporter, who whatever he has seen, the good, the bad, and the ugly? Won't it eclipse his judgment?
Patrick, probably before I answer that, I think there's one other concept which we need to develop in Uganda. You're talking about media owners becoming, journalists becoming media owners. I think we should go back to why journalism matters. And why does journalism matter? Because journalism operates in the framework of values. There are certain values, we objectivity, impartiality, and that kind of thing. And therefore, we should treat journalism as a public good. And if it's a public good, then it has to be sponsored by the consumers themselves and also probably the state. Coming back to that question, this question of signing for transport has been coming up. But what we do at our place is that we discourage it, except if if you remember during the campaigns, sometimes there was an elaborate plan that, you know, everybody because of security and everybody has to be embedded. So if it is open for everyone, that has to be facilitated. Actually, we call it facilitation. It has to be facilitated. Whether your story comes with embellishment, the editor is able to see that. After all, the final gatekeeper is the editor. So we discourage it, but we can't grant that doesn't happen. And some people,
but also
and some people do it with good intentions.
Paul, it's going to happen also because in most cases, for maybe 80% of the reporters are coming to that press conference, really, they don't have the transport. That's another thing. So you'll sign for it, a transport refund, because you actually need to go back to the newsroom. So the onus, I think, is for the media owners to be able to facilitate fully, right?
Okay, may I interrupt a little bit?
Yes,
actually, it goes back to the other point which you first made, that, you know, we have so many radios, and therefore that's an indicator of freedom of expression and freedom of the press. If you cannot facilitate your journalists, then in a way you're compromising the freedom.
But Paul has explained that. He said he's looking at it from optimistic, from the glass full kind of thing. So yes, there are problems, but we're taking a stride.
Some media houses don't deserve to exist.
Let me remind you of a story.
Yeah.
I think it was WAF.
Yes.
Who came to the newsroom in a general meeting, and then he said he had gone downtown in Kikubo.
Yes.
And that there was a man who called the Daily Monitor office and asked to meet a particular reporter to send him to downtown to do a story. And surprisingly, it's the MD who picked. He said, I want the other reporter. So fellow said, but that reporter is not around, so maybe, but we have a pool of reporters, we can send you another. Say, I'll send you another. That one you're sending me, what charges it? What are the charges?
Yes.
You should have seen in the entire newsroom, everybody was like called. Like somebody called the MD, and that businessman in Kikubu is asking, what are the charges of the reporter you're sending me? So we really felt, I don't know whether Wafula really made it to scare us or somebody had actually called.
No.
But can you imagine something like that?
It happens.
That's so many years back. I still remember it, and has a chilling effect on me.
Yes, it happens. Patrick, and if I may explain, you see, there are also certain personal vices. Journalists are also human beings like others. When they get some places, they get tempted. Some of them actually, they are facilitated. They give them transport to go and cover an event, but still when they go there, they find certain things, and then they say, oh no, if you want me to do this story, you have to give me this. Okay. As a news editor, I went through all this kind of, and I was able to catch
Paul, you as chairperson Media Council of Uganda, some of us, I think, have lost it in a way. You know, especially now with the proliferation of podcasts and YouTube channels and all that, I seem to see there are people who are taking a tendency of, like, you know, can I call it hostile dependency? Let me attack Paul and really left, right, and center, and then somehow he'll come out. He'll come out and give me something. And then you'll see somebody is bombarding a particular person with a lot of negativity. Sometimes even the words are, you know, are abusive. And after a few days, the same person will be praising that person. And I'm thinking, maybe there are some of us who are having some kind of depending on being hostile dependency.
I think what you're saying is the very essence of why media freedom or press freedom, as it were, is not absolute. There has to be accountability and responsibility. These days, as you have correctly said, there are people who are on hire to attack others, to malign others, and to undermine others. So there must be some kind of regime which tries to control them. And that is where now we come in with either self-regulation or other kind of regulation. And sometimes when that happens, then people say there's no press freedom. There is no freedom to abuse. There is no freedom to malign. There is no freedom to undermine. There is only freedom to speak. But it has to be controlled. See? So if you talk about what you've just been talking about, the brown envelope, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it ethical? If the answer is no, then there's no compromise. You can't explain it away in any way. It is unethical. It must be fought as a vice in whichever way you can. Pius said the right thing here, that you facilitate people transport to Nebi, to wherever, give them a car. But when you start putting money into envelopes to give facilitation, you know you are breaching ethics of journalism. And all of you are journalists would know that this is a breach and we shouldn't encourage it. So you, I, whoever it is, has to fight this vice, not only in journalism but everywhere else.
Dr. Patricio, would I be right to say the mainstream media, like the one we have right now, is facing an existential threat, and it could be gone in a couple of decades? Mm-hmm. And the world now is in the hands of the citizen journalism, and that cannot change. It can only get, maybe it will get better, but maybe it will in a way change in its own way, but I think that's where we're headed. Because there could be, let's say, a TV station with about 100,000 subscribers. But in that TV station, there is a reporter who also has his own personal YouTube channel that has 1 million what? Mm-hmm. subscribers. So the landscape has changed. It's never going to be the same again.
No. Yes.
So what do we do to maintain quality so that doesn't become negative?
Yes, traditional media is under threat, but I don't think it's going to go away completely, because as people experience more citizen journalism, like Paul has been saying, people begin to appreciate the aspect of freedom shouldn't be absolute. When we see a lot of misinformation and the consequences of it, when we see a lot of defamation and the consequences of it, when we see abuse of privacy and the consequences of it, sometimes you see that return to traditional media. Sometimes you see people are looking for Patrick Kamara. Why? Because Patricia and her sensational YouTube channel, like we get beaten.
I've seen that, especially in different, let's say, WhatsApp group. Maybe there's breaking news.
Yes.
And they say, wait a minute, okay, has NTV talked about it? And then you're like,
no.
Wait a minute, maybe because people
Yes.
still think, well, we need to know guys who have gatekeepers.
And maybe just for survival, what traditional media is doing is also tapping into that. While they know they still have some credibility and the people who believe in it, and luckily most people who believe in it are still the people with the checkbook. Maybe that's also dinosaur. So you see they're diversifying and also trying to have these spaces. But of course, like we said earlier, when you have these spaces as traditional media, do you write news the good old way? Do you broadcast the good old way? Or you've got to think the X way, concise, precise, appreciation for analysis are normally provided as a link to something else. Do people click that link? Do they look for this information? So there's a way they are diversifying to also embrace that, but there's still appreciation. If you just see the latest Ipsos report, it will show you that there's still a bit of room for survival, because it ranks traditional media really well. And some of the new media, yes, there are a lot of young people poaching on this here and there, but in terms of viewership, in terms of readership,
the credibility part.
Yes, credibility, we still see traditional media surviving. So there's a bit of hope, but then how do we manage the new space? How do we handle citizen journalism? And what Paul is talking about is, who is a journalist? How do we not control, but how do we manage those to promote the professional ethics, like maybe the legal people would do? What counts? What shouldn't?
That is so. It's really in his docket, Paul.
No, mine is very simple. As the council, as government, we have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have a system that is transparent. We have to make sure that we have we take note that there is a growing aspect of citizen journalism, which is totally not controllable, as it were, by individual. Other jurisdictions have decided to control the platforms. Maybe we shall explore that and see whether we can control the platform.
Hold on your point, Paul. Paul, Pius, and Dr. Litho. We're going to take a break, and on the spot we'll be right back. And when we come back also, we shall give you the opportunity to have your say. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amar, and my guest this evening, I have Paul Ekochu, Chairperson Media Council of Uganda, Pius Katunzi, Managing Director, The Observer, and Dr. Patricia Litho, Board Chairperson, Uganda Media Women's Association. I think, in all fairness, even we, the people who are supposed to be driving quality, have changed. I don't know, maybe our preferences are different. I've been looking at some Uganda dailies. Every time there's a war somewhere in Iraq or in Ukraine, the headlines, and in fact I think even the sales increase. Zitokota, Zivuga, you know, that kind of stuff. And that's what, because they understand the business, it's working. And so, and I'm working, what is it about the Ugandan reader, especially if we're reading it in Rutoro in Uganda, for us to be so much in love with the intercontinental ballistic missiles going around? Or maybe if Villa is playing KCC in Nambole, probably they will score a goal and celebrate themselves, and the stands will be empty. But to go to that border stage, everybody will be telling you about how, you know, Ferguson is doing this, or nowadays who are they? and you know, and they understand the entire 11 of Man U, of Arsenal, whatever, and our own. Well, apart from Unduparaka, I love those guys of Unduparaka. For they come in big numbers, even right borders, from Arua to Kampala. So our preferences are kind of different, you know. No wonder. It is even very hard to, you write a story, unless you're going to write about Arsenal and Man United and whatever, maybe you'll have sales. But write about our own here? Apart from the car? No.
Well, before we went offline, you had asked me a question which I want to quickly go over, and then I come to that point. It was about the rise of citizen journalism vis-a-vis the traditional media. In my view, the legacy media is still quite intact, very, very intact. And the only thing is a few pieces of polishings here and there in the qualitativeness of it and the ethics sometimes which go wrong. Now, the rise of the citizen media or the journalism is really a result, of course, of technology, but also very much a result of any weakness that we might perceive in the legacy media. So what do we do as a citizenry or as a state and government to try and help or to try and quell citizen journalism which is going bad? In my view, there are basically three things we should do, and we should support each other in this. One, we should raise the voices of good journalism. Two, we should polish the quality of journalism as it is practiced. And three, we who regulate and those who manage should smoothen the pathway of good journalism so legacy media can grow and subdue the voices of bad journalism. Now, when you talk about the papers talking about and the subjects that are going to be talked about in the media, it is also an indication of legacy media getting weak. When you start dealing more in sensationalism other than in factual reporting on issues that affect the community, you are missing out on two other very important parts of journalism. You know, it's supposed to educate, inform, and entertain. But now the focus is on entertainment, because entertainment is easy, and human nature is that our psychology wants what is easy. I think you've heard of the 80-20 principle and all those things, the XY principle in management, that the lazy people who don't want to work, they don't want to think. The brain uses 30% of our calories, so you try to reduce the usage of that to survive. So if you say, there's a story about, and we talked about this, there's no way we can finish a program without talking about the English Premier League. If you put Man U versus Arsenal here today, and then you put the Minister of Agriculture is going to present a paper on how you can grow groundnuts very well in Teso and make money, Man U Arsenal will win. It's easier to understand. And therefore, you people who are selling news want to sell. So you sell what will sell quickly, and what sells easily is entertainment. So now it's also incumbent upon you and us, of course, to make sure that we shift the public mindset. Public mindset should be shifted to where it should be, so that you can have journalism grow well, and not just for journalism's sake, but for the sake of the nation as a whole.
I am going to open the lines right now so that you two who is watching from wherever you are, you have an opportunity to have your say. And perhaps you're journalists, or maybe a citizen journalist, or just a consumer of what we write. So this is a moment to challenge us, or maybe to agree with us. So, Dr. All of you, the good thing is that you are optimistic that legacy media is going to survive, and because it has been there since the biblical times, and so it will be there. But you know, you can hound and harass the president on a TV and radio station, even write anything, even do your cartoons. You may not be able to do that to the MTN of the world, the Editorial of the world, to Dr. Sudhiru Paredia. Isn't the real enemy now from the corporate world? More or less where you sit. You are the guys who are the real enemies. In fact, President Yoweri Museveni is not the enemy of the media. The corporate world is. Yes. They pay, at the same time they can stifle.
Yes, and like you sort of made reference to survival of legacy media and how who blows the piper, you know, you sort of follow. So the issue is if you're going to do decent, ethical journalism, following the principles of journalism, and your key sponsor, who is between you and closing your media house, as we've seen statistics in this year, for instance, a lot of media houses actually challenged, or even closing some of their channels. So sometimes they've got to make that balance, because I know government is one of the biggest spenders in media, but how does government pay? Government is always in a lot of debt, and these media houses sometimes need to survive. So they've got to balance. Sometimes they've got to balance on how much of that should they say. We've heard of so many stories of very good investigative stories, maybe about witch sugar and the other thing, being muted because of the financial muscle that they have. While the president has proved more tolerant to certain things, you may criticize him and things like that, and maybe at some point at his State of the Nation address, when you even think he's forgotten, he'll make reference to something that irritated him, but he'll more or less allow you to operate as a journalist. While the corporate world, because of the immediate impact they feel when there's a negative story, it translates to how much money they make, and that also translates to how much placement they can have with the media. So sometimes you find that those compromises are made, and it's not even so much about the quality of journalism or even the editor, but sometimes who owns the media house. And like you said, when a good journalist becomes a media owner and is the one now receiving the call, which is different from you'd hide maybe behind maybe a politician or another businessman owning a media house. You know, they're only thinking about the money. But now when you've got to pay salaries and things like that, sometimes you find that people begin to think differently. Maybe this one, we let it lie low, or we tone down. So I think it's more like they withhold information as opposed to maybe putting out something that will totally shut them down because of the obvious reasons of survival that everybody is grappling with at the moment.
There has always been these allegations, Pius, of spies in the newsrooms for the state, you know, and sometimes you hear those stories. Sometimes they even point fingers at anybody, that, you know, that guy is is an agent. You know, how do you deal with that?
Thank you, Patrick. It's a reality.
You have agents in the newsroom?
Yes, it's just, you see, a newsroom is just like a country, okay? There are all kinds of people, and I'll be surprised if the state is not interested in knowing what's going on in any newsroom or something like that. But some are for good, some are for good reasons, but others are also for personal benefit. But what I wanted to say is that it's one of those subtle threats, because now one of the biggest problems we have to the freedom of the press is our failure to protect the sources. Because of the presence of the spies, okay, now it's very difficult to do a very good investigative stories, because with the emergence of AI, emergence of these new technologies, a source can be properly located, even if you try to deny. You know, there are call logs, there are travel logs, there are, you know these gadgets we move with. They're also spying on us. So when I go and meet the chairman here, it will indicate for you move from this place, and so they are able to trace who your source. And yet that used to be one of the should I say the cardinal thing about journalism, that we were able to protect our sources. Now I don't think we are fully able to
but you know
what
I hear repeatedly, of course, is that some top editors, you know, are on a retainer, or maybe corporate bodies and government agencies. A journalist will go there and toil and investigate a story, and he brings it, and then somehow the story is killed from above. And I don't have a specific example I can give, but I hear that a lot.
Yeah, well,
that you guys who are in charge, some of your colleagues are actually on retainer. And people under your watch and under your care, their stories are killed to enrich the managing editor, for example.
Patrick, I'll tell you
the news manager.
I'll tell you a story, a short story.
Is that possible?
I'll tell you a story to answer that. Mm-hmm. One time when General Kihura was still the IGP, I was contacted by one of his assistants and said, you know, come to our office. We've heard you have this terrible story about the IGP. I said, which story? He said, no, even there's a copy of it here. I said, please show me the copy. So I later learned that there was a guy who was impersonating us and said he had gone to KK to receive on our behalf. So I told the assistant, you know what you do? Set up this guy, let this guy, now tell him, give him the rest of the money, and tell him to bring the rest of the story. And we come, and unfortunately, we waited for this, it never came, and what we discovered that actually the KK's group and the other guy, they each discovered their weaknesses, and they were all benefiting from that chaos.
So there could have been someone who was eating Pius Katunzi's money?
Yes, at the expense of our reputation and our name. So some of those things have happened. And then also, in some cases, like we talked about the corporate organization, so someone said, well, this happened, okay? I'm being honest with you, this happened, but please give me time as I gather a way of answering or accounting to my customers, that kind of thing. So you hold a story, not really that you have killed it, you hold a story. So the junior person who has been in the trenches following this story, he may not understand the dynamic. So he will say, oh, my boss was compromised, was given something. And so, but also...
That's how you explain it?
But also in some places, I've heard in some places actually, yeah, they are on retainer. So anything happens, you just call them, so no, forget about that story, and it's killed.
You know, Paul, in a country that has serious integrity deficit, like ours, it's no brainer that bravery would be an issue, not so?
For me, as a lawyer, first of all, here, I like to respond to where there's empirical evidence. If we are going to speak on opinion, well, yes, the thing is,
don't take us to a legal altar.
Bribes are wrong. They're not ethical. They should be fought at all levels. What happens in the newsrooms, like he's talking about, may be true, but I think it's important. Now that we have this platform here, we're talking to the public, we should find a way to fight it and stop it. But before you take the mic away from me, I think there's something important that I want us to focus on, or to get to focus on as we go into discussion and questions come, which is the theme of this year's, I'm taking you off subject, this year's
it's in order.
World Press Day. The theme is a press for the planet. Yes. Journalism in the face of the environmental crisis. It is important to all of us that we discuss how the press and all of us can help to avert this crisis. You have heard about the floods in Nairobi. We have had them in Uganda. We have had them everywhere.
Actually, I'm told there has been a landslide on the Rwenzori Mountain.
In the Rwenzori Mountains, we should now find a way. And
UNRWA has just released the report of the roads that have been cut off in Karamoja.
Yeah. What is the press doing to make sure we avert this crisis and help the public? I remember during the COVID pandemic, the press was wonderful. If they were going to give marks an exam, they got 120%. If there was no press, no media during that time, I don't know how worse it would have been. I think you did a very tremendous job. So with such a topic, I think it's also something we should to look into and see how are we doing it and what can we do to do better.
We need to also to have journalists who can specialize in the area of environment. I remember there was a friend, I'm forgetting, at the New Vision. He was really good in environment reporting. Yeah, no, after that, the Chile is like way back. There's another gentleman.
The one when they did gorillas and did something. I remember.
Yes, so that caliber of people who can what. But when I look at how we survive on the environment, for example, if a British Prime Minister, I'm told 100 years ago, because he was dazzled by the beauty of this country, he baptized the Pearl of Africa. I don't know if he were to come back, what he would say 100 years later, because there has been depletion of the forest cover. And one of the reasons why I think it is depleted is because just to eat a meal, a tree somewhere has to be cut. For the majority of Ugandans. For those who are having dinner tonight, that dinner either has been prepared using charcoal or wood. Even us and the rich, probably they are not using electricity to cook. So as a country and as a humanity, we are in a self-destructive mode.
Yes. Yes.
Patrick, probably the chairman is tempting me to leak, because tomorrow I'm going to do also a presentation of that. It's tempting me to leak some of the of what I'm going to say. But it goes back to the other issue. I say that journalism should be taken as a public good. Okay? I'll give an example. One time we did an investigative story, and this was about a quack doctor. Okay? But it was one of the worst selling headline. People are not interested. Okay, so in such a circumstance, what do you do? So there's so many environmental stories which you can write and they spice them up, but they will not sell. And then I'll have issues with paying the journalists. So the best way is like now environmental agencies come up and support the cause for environment protection and awareness, that kind of thing, and then by sponsoring. So in that, even if the newspaper or a radio incurs costs in distributing this information, there's some kind of cushioning. Okay? Otherwise, it's going to go back the same thing. There are so many angles to which you can do this thing. For instance, let us look at our investment policies and industrial policies and how they are not in tandem with environmental concerns. You see, we have now companies manufacturing Buvera, manufacturing diapers, manufacturing all these plastic bottles. Why do we have plastic bottles up to now when some people are using real glass bottles? How come there's no kind of, how they call it, I've forgotten the term in economics, but some kind of rebate or some kind of subsidy to those who manufacture things
that are not harmful.
They are not harmful. All those kind of things. All these things are integrated, and we can come up with so many stories from different angles. But you know, we know them, but they are costly. As you know, good journalism costs money.
I think the other journalist, I just remember, I think it was Gerald Tenua.
Oh yeah.
Gerald Tenua was very good in, you know, keep focused on environment and honing and his skill, and every time he would get better. And I think every time he would write a story on environment, and, you know, would read it. You know why? Because he had honed his skill. He would present it in a certain way you feel you do read it, and that's no wonder Gerald Tenua's stories.
But you know what happens afterwards? Afterwards, he becomes an activist, and some other group snatches him, and then he's out of it.
We wrote a beautiful story last year about the lions that were killed. I guess that kind of story sells because there are lions involved, and how the habitation of land within the parks and on the periphery of the parks is affecting the interaction of human beings and wildlife.
Yeah, but now you see, Dr. Litho, this is actually in your docket as well, because I'm sure you're very passionate about the environment, even though even though you also want the money, because so I think organizations like yours should be sponsoring reporting on environment.
Yes, and I want
because we were choosing
I was actually waiting for him
of committing ecological terror.
Yes, and I actually wanted to speak to that as we speak about press freedom, we should also worry about misinformation. And environment is one of those places, like you say, the ecological terror it's one of those places that we see a lot of sponsored misinformation by environmental journalists or writers or bloggers or this whole group of people who call themselves journalists. So you'll find, for instance, there's a claim about the whole oil journey of Uganda, the ECOP, killing some hundreds of rivers and things like that. So how many rivers do we actually have in Uganda? And in that corridor of the pipeline, how many lakes and rivers are actually there? You know things like that sometimes. Have you heard of the question?
Have you heard of this river in Mbarara, forgetting this name? Have you heard of River Ruizi?
Yes.
Did you know River Ruizi used to be a serious river?
Yeah.
But now it has just become a trickle.
Yes, it has.
Do you know that Mbarara city is planning to get water from Kagera on the border with Tanzania? Because there's no water rate. Yeah.
I'm not saying environmental issues are not real. My concern is about, as we practice press freedom, we should be mindful of misinformation. And because he talked about these environmental bodies that come and sponsor, sometimes they have a totally different motive when they sponsor and promote misinformation. For instance, the misinformation that has been basically pushed on Uganda and people lying about these things and how many rivers are destroyed and how many lives. Yes, there are certain concerns we need to pay attention to, but what has actually happened? So that the factual, basically the principles of journalism.
There's some threads. You know why? Because you are exploring oil from a very ecologically sensitive area.
Yes.
The Albertine Graben. You have Lake Albert there. And I'm told you're going to get oil horizontal, you go down and go horizontal below the lake. And I don't know the technology, but what I saw during the Obama administration in Mexico, you remember the Macondo Lake? Yes. Yeah? You see how that gave the Americans sleepless nights because the Macondo spill was just destroying the entire Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
Even America, highly technological America, was almost brought to its knees. I'm wondering, God forbid, on Lake Albert, if that ever happened.
Yes, so the question should be, what are your mitigation measures? As opposed to making up some things about what has happened so far. Nothing has even happened so far. There are bits of things about relocation. Of course, that's a bit about the environment of disrupting livelihoods and things like that. But for me, where I have particular concern is the misinformation about, for instance, as an example, the number of lakes and rivers destroyed, and we don't even have those numbers of rivers rivers and lakes in Uganda, for instance, and the mitigation measures that have been put in place. And I like the way you brought up that issue, like you hear we are going to go underground this lake and do this, and the question is, supposing there's a spillage. Those should be the questions, as opposed to making up some things.
Okay.
So responsible journalism, environmental.
Until you're having technical issues with the lines, so our time is almost up. But this is what I'm going to do: ask you, Pius, to give us your concluding remark. I come to Paul and end with Dr. Litho.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick, for hosting us. And I would like to conclude with this assurance to my dear sister here that the difference between journalism and other channels is that we subject that information to certain tests. Okay, so I don't think there will be a sober editor who will accept information that you're writing about for instance, our situation in Western Uganda, that such amount of rivers have been destroyed because of this, and then we know when we actually have one river, so we'll be able to cross-check that. But as I said, the problem sometimes is painting the social media and painting the journalist with the same kind of brush, and that causes confusion. Please, I'm asking that don't confuse social media with the journalist. The journalist still can do a better job and can do a job that can rescue this environment.
I like the way he has ended, and I'm very happy with that. That journalists can actually do a very good thing to save our environment, and they must do that. As we end our talk show, first I'd like to, there's something I have to thank Patricia for their organization, for what they're doing to empower women journalists.
Thank you.
It's a very good thing, and I have seen the effect is there. We now have an MD in Winter Publications who's a lady. We have a chief editor in New Vision. I think you had a general manager here who was a lady before. So I think the women movement is doing very well, and thank you for all that you're doing. In terms of our talk today, I want us to focus on the environment and make sure, like Pius said, that the journalists and the press does a good job to promote good conduct in terms of preserving our environment and saving us from the environmental crisis. And lastly, when we talk about press freedom, it is important that when we make arguments on press freedom or make statements about press freedom, we should make them within the proper context of our nation as it is, where we were, where we are now, and where we are going. We should appreciate the positive steps and move forward. Secondly, we should raise and make arguments about media with the view to benefit the betterment of our society. Whatever we say about press freedom should be made to better our society. So where there are mistakes, they should be raised properly in a good forum. Activism is good, but it's always better to come and talk to those who actually can make a difference. I have never seen, for example, any media person coming to the Media Council to complain against what the state could have done against them. Yet the law gives you the right to come to the Media Council and say, so-and-so has done this wrong, we need this to be done. And we are supposed to make a finding on it. But nobody has ever come to do that. So use the law and the right forums to bring out a better society and a better, what should I call it, environment for journalism. And lastly, you should raise and make arguments on media and press freedom with the foresight that we are building a nation, not just for us who are now older, but for the younger ones. Anything we say negative about ourselves takes us back. We have to keep a positive mind at all times that we're getting better and better. The glass is not half empty. The glass is 3/4 full. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Your parting shot, Dr. Litho.
Yes, and I think Paul was in a way nudging me that, hey, you're not saying anything about the women. So to that, I would like to say that, of course, press freedom is exercised and should be exercised in a responsible way. And in that spirit, we need to see the pluralism, the diversity in voices, the diversity in representation of who we have. So I would just like to highlight that when we have environmental issues, women are often the most affected. But we see this angle coming through as journalists, you know, write about the environment and the impact. We want to see more women's voices, those experiences, so that we get those invaluable narratives shaping what we say as we raise awareness and hold the stakeholders that be responsible for how they are doing all this. And for me, one of the things I would like to reemphasize that Paul said is freedom is not enjoyed in absoluteness. You've got to be mindful of other freedoms, of privacy, defamation, not inciting violence, hate speech, privacy, amongst everything else. So as we worry about the environmental issues, I think we've got to look at the triple planetary crisis, biodiversity, but also the other aspects of the environment, of misinformation, and what that then does in informing the public and making them more responsible.
Dr. Patricia Letho, thank you so much. Mr. Paul Kochu and Pius Katunzi, gentlemen, I want to thank you for the time you have given us, for having honored the invitation to come, but also for adding value to this platform. I know you have all ended on a very optimistic note, and I want also to agree with you. But I have seen so many things in my line of duty. I can say that sometimes we do not allow to be criticized. I think if I can tell the young journalists there, let us be humble. Let us allow to be criticized, because criticism breeds quality. We can be better when we are advised to do things right. True, in some newsrooms, we have lacked the energy. The energy is low. Let's pick it up where we lost it and be better. And if I remember growing up as a journalist, because of two people in Fort Portal, I think all of them are deceased now. Mrs. Karamagi and Dr. Kairumba, they would come, listen to me on radio, and come with a list of my mistakes every day. Mrs. Karamagi or Dr. Kairumba would say, call me Patrick. I would come down and say, yesterday you've read this word. Can you read it for me? I would read it, and they say it's wrong. This is how they read it. And I would wait every week for Mrs. Karamagi to come, or Dr. Kairumba, with the list of my mistakes. And I know on this platform, probably I have made mistakes. I know I have made mistakes, but they have not been intentional. And these are personal mistakes or personal weaknesses. I promise you, I'll try to be better every day. Good night, and God bless Uganda.
Good night.